So thanks everybody for joining on another of Barbados SEO Talks. Today we have someone really special. We've got Fili Wiese with us. He's one of the amazing speakers we're going to have at Barbados SEO. So thank you very much for joining us, Fili.
Yeah, absolute pleasure.
I'm sure everybody knows Fili's an ex-Google engineer, he's been in the industry since forever. But I'm going to ask you what I ask everybody. How did you get started in SEO?
So I got actually started because I had my own web design company and web hosting company, and I'm also a librarian. So for me, those two kind of merged together. So I studied library studies, so information studies, and as a result, as a librarian, I want to make the world accessible. It's I want information to be found, and as a web designer and web developer, as well as a hosting company, I'm okay, I want to make sure that the infrastructure is there. I want to make sure that the web pages are there, that people can access it. So that's how I started.
That's really interesting. I think this is one of the most interesting, starting, a lot of people started in agencies, a lot of people went into marketing or software development. I haven't interviewed anyone who'd been studying information. That's really cool. And
I think, to be honest, it's one of those things that it's very underestimated, because information studies is really about understanding what the user wants, what they're looking for. I literally worked in a number of different libraries, university libraries, even during my studies, just to understand. And I did a lot of information studies topics like thesaurus making and knowledge management and workflow management, document management type of stuff. And all of this stuff, it comes back into every organization nowadays, but it also comes back into SEO. And it helps also me understand what an organizational flow is, information flow within an organization of okay, say you have an insurance company, they have a form coming in from the customer that needs to be converted to a digital format that then needs to be edited by other users within the company, and that then needs to result in a certain action. And so the whole workflow kind of thing. Now, if you tap into there, how do you adapt your website into that and make it also usable for search engines? That's something okay, what part of that can you expose to search engines? So it's to me also surprising that there's not enough librarians actually in the industry.
Mm-hmm. And in the end, is what you were saying, it's about making information accessible to as many people as possible when they need it.
Yes, and search engines are a method to do that. It's not the only method, I'll say that also. I did specialize in it, but well, like with many industries, there are specializations within each industry, and SEO is one of them. Marketing. That's cool. And yeah, it's all part of, in the end, making the information accessible.
And since when you started until today, I'm sure you've seen lots of changes in the industry, but what would you say is the biggest change that the SEO industry has gone through in all this time?
That's a good question. I think this industry particularly goes through a lot of different changes. Industries or other certain professions may be more stable. Think a plumber or think even an architect. Yes, building rules change, and yes, methods of how to install pipes and requirements by law, etc., change. But the overall, the day-to-day work, you're still drawing, like an architect is still drawing plans, and a plumber is still laying down pipes, kind of thing. And in our industry, it changes a lot, and not just because of Google or other search engines. It's also just how to convince the user. Like right now, we have the whole AI hype, which is not an AI, by the way. They're not sentient. We shouldn't call them AI, but that's another story. That's another debate. I understand where it comes from, but it is a language model. So for me, on one end, I'm like, okay, great. We have the word AI incorporated, short, simple. Everyone remembers it. It emulates the feeling of hey, Skynet is almost born. But at the same time, it's not sentient. It can't do anything without our input. So, it still needs us. So it's not an AI. It's an advanced algorithm. Yes, it's based on a language model. Yes, but it's not an AI. But again, different debate. But this is one of those hypes right now that is most definitely adding some disruption to the industry. And for better or for worse, we will see what it will be. I think for better in the end, because if you look back at the industry, and like I started pre-Google. So I still optimize websites to get them indexed as a librarian and web designer, web developer, in things like Hotbot and Lycos and Excite and All the Web and Alta Vista. And this was all fun to do. And then Google came around. All the Web at the time was one of the better ones. And then they were very fast as well. And then Google came along very quickly after that. And when you look at it, that was a massive disruption. Now, then you have the whole e-commerce, like what we are spending now on e-commerce compared to what we were spending in early 2000 is completely different. Not to mention the bubble crack, the bubble popping at the beginning of 2000s. So yeah, there's continuous disruption. Techniques are changing. I think the biggest challenge is to keep up with it for most people. But that having said, a lot of it still relies on foundational parts. If your website is not accessible, it doesn't matter what the technique is nowadays. Mm-hmm. You do need to make your website accessible. You do need to know what your content is. You do need to know what your website is about. You do need to have a business strategy behind your website. SEO can't be your business strategy. SEO complements your business strategy and makes it happen. It's a tool to make your business strategy happen. And it's an important tool depending on your business, because if you are a sales, like a door-to-door salesman or a local car dealer or a local bakery, then the web isn't that important to you. Sure, to be found, but not as a conversion metric goal kind of thing for your business. Your business doesn't depend on it. Whereas if you're an online bookstore, like one of those big ones, or hotel booking, then that is your primary business. So it really depends on the business.
Mm-hmm. You were mentioning that one of the biggest challenges these days is keeping up with the constant change in the industry.
Yes.
How do you keep up with the constant change in the industry?
So I've a little bit of a benefit here. I'm a developer also, so I was most definitely within my study, funny enough, the most technical one there. I did my thesis on XML schemas, which let's just say was more advanced than most of the people within the study understood at that time. Now, this is more than 20 years, well, almost 20 years ago. So, but yeah, this is something that helps me today even. Now, on top of that, one of the other things, while at Google, I also embraced, while I was working at Google, I also embraced continuing to learn from a development point of view, as well as from, well, basically everything else within Google and how they operate, how they think, etc. And a lot of the things I can see nowadays still happen, I can recognize the patterns of how the organization operates and how they think and how the teams think and how the engineers think behind the teams and how they push for today to recognize which change is important, which change is less important. And again, at the end of the day, we still come back to foundational. If the website is inaccessible, we're not going to be able to SEO.
Yeah.
So that's one way. And I invest also a lot of time in kernel programming as well as in, again, foundational stuff like HTTP and stuff like that. And I'm saying HTTP as a protocol, not as, just the URL part. No, also the design of a URL is actually quite important because you have things like matrix URLs where you have a .comma in the URL with a session ID. Now that is actually horrible for SEO. And knowing that and how to go about that and recognizing what is a good URL and what isn't, and how to have a good URL structure and what to do about it, how to move your content potentially, because every single change that you make to a URL, if you add a slash to it, say, okay, from so just hypothetical, you have a website, a current website, and you notice some of the URLs end with slash and some of them end without the slash, and you accept both. You decide to enforce one of the two methods, which is better for canonicization within search engines. However, half of them are actually indexed without the slash and the other half are indexed with the slash. Now, if you enforce the slash on them, you are effectively moving the content and all the signals with it from half of your website to the version that you enforced with the slash. And that is a content move. Now, luckily, if nothing else changes, that's not a big problem, or it doesn't have to be. But that's an example. If you don't recognize that, you're going to have problems.
Mm-hmm. As someone who's been in the industry for like more than 2 decades, and I'm sure you've worked in like lots of different projects, and you work at Google. Is that like something that you keep seeing that companies keep getting wrong about SEO?
Yeah, I see different things. It really depends. Depends on the company. I see companies that like prioritize whatever the engineers are thinking, which I can understand. But engineers, although I am one, they're not necessarily great business analysts or CEOs. So from that perspective, most definitely give them a voice, but don't make them the deciding voice. Yeah, same as the marketing person, again, give them a voice, not the deciding one. There's a reason why the CEO is not tend to be also the marketing manager at the same time, or the chief engineer at the same time. There is other responsibilities that come with it, and that they come from an engineering background can help, but they're not, their day-to-day activities should not be engineering.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And well, it depends per company. That's one thing I see, but other things I see as well is doing a lot of content moves. So the example I just mentioned with the trailing slash,
the URLs,
the URL changes. There's so often that I get people who come to me saying like, oh, do you think this is a good URL structure for a website? And I'm like, well, it's not great, but you have it now. It's legacy. You have to deal with it now. And the content is evergreen content that's supposed to stay there. They're like, yeah, but I can rename it. I can make it this and this structure. I'm like, yeah, but that's a content move. You're going to suffer for months in the search results if you do that, for the simple reason that if your website is large enough, it's going to take forever to recrawl that and get a critical mass of that website reassigned all those signals to the new patterns. And that's just shooting yourself a little bit in the foot. You have to be careful with content moves.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it may seem like it's a small thing, but it has like a long-lasting effect. And as you said, it's not a quick thing.
No, but that doesn't mean that you can't optimize for it. It doesn't mean that you can't change over time. It does mean that you have to treat legacy as legacy, and that you need to come with a plan to phase it out. That you, like, for example, if you have regular user-generated content, then start generating the content on the new URL while leaving the old content on the old URL structure until enough of the user-generated content is expired, so to say, or isn't valid anymore, at which point you're going to start returning 404s. And at that point, when you get to a low point, say 10% is left, at that point you just move the last 10%. You don't move the whole site in one go. This type of thing. So it doesn't mean that you can't change. It's just something that you have to plan, and you should really also do an audit before that, because you need to make sure that your crawl budget is really spent on the right URLs from that moment onward when you start introducing the new URLs, the new URL structure.
You were mentioning before that, everything moves really fast in the industry these days. And SEO is usually not something for like quick wins, and it's not a fast thing. Like sometimes you see changes in being implemented having like effect quickly, but especially with content, results can take a little bit to like appear and like to like generate results. Do you think people who work in the industry, especially like clients or like, business owners, do they understand the fact that, it's not as easy as switching a button on?
Yes, they do tend to, but it heavily depends on a number of other factors as well. Like I said, you do need to make sure that your other technical signals of your website are in order. An audit is really necessary at the time that you decide to do something, before you decide to do something, to fix all the issues before you start doing anything else. And on top of that, yeah, sorry, I lost the question.
No, I was asking you if you think that, given the fast-paced nature of the industry, if businesses understand that SEO is sometimes not the fastest way of achieving results.
Yes. So once you have your house in order and you can start moving, depending on the size of the website, it can take quite some time. If you have 100 million URLs, to crawl a critical mass for Google of that, and assuming that you actually have 100 million URLs with quality content, because if it isn't, Google will not attempt to actually even crawl the majority of that, at least not half of it or something. That in itself is a signal as well, by the way. You do need to prioritize. A lot of one of the things is in the industry, we use the word crawl budget very often. And I think, to be honest, that's a wrong word. We should be talking about crawl priority. And one of the reasons is that Google can potentially crawl everything, but it won't. It doesn't crawl from A to Z. It picks the first URL most of the time. That's the start of your homepage, because that's when the domain got registered and where you first publish your website, and that's what they found the first time. After that, there's a URL scheduler, an algorithm that's called the URL scheduler, that then basically based on different factors starts to crawl different URLs from a big queue. On freshness, like if a certain URL is being mentioned in one of the backlinks or a news article, or is being found and the URL structure suggests that there might be some quality content on there. So in that regard, not every URL gets crawled. A big chunk may get crawled like once a year, whereas a small 10% of the website gets crawled once a month or once a week or even once a day or multiple times a day. Like think your homepage. The homepage gets crawled multiple times per day, whereas the blog article from 2008 gets maybe crawled once every 3 years. Depending what that article is about, you may want to say, okay, we may want to no index that, or get rid of it forward. Like if you're a travel site and that talks about the great pizza joints in New York, that's not good content. It doesn't, like if you're a hotel booking website, that's not really helping with hotel bookings. Now, if you're a pizza website, sure, that could be something for historic purposes, but in that case, make a site guide or something like that. Make something that people can link to as evergreen content instead of a blog article from 2008. And Google recently, funny enough, was also saying like, okay, you shouldn't delete old content, helpful content, but the keyword in there is helpful. If it isn't helpful anymore, then sure, get rid of it because it's not helpful.
Yeah.
But the problem is that a lot of people, and this is where Google is a bit cautious, obviously, because the moment they start, if they say one thing saying like, oh yeah, old content isn't as useful anymore, people start deleting all the
things,
old content.
yeah.
And the problem is Google isn't talking to just us SEOs. They're talking to all webmasters. And that means the pop and mom shops around the corner as well. And if they hear something like that, they may go like, oh, now I need to delete stuff. And they don't have our experience. They don't have our insights. So the problem is the majority of the audience that Google is addressing, John Wood and the others, they're trying to address also this group of people that are not so savvy in SEO, or that are not hardcore SEOs. Not to say that SEO is necessarily always right. That's another story. We make plenty of mistakes as well. But then again, we are there to experiment and learn from. So that's the difference. And this is our profession. And for a lot of other website owners, the majority of the website owners that Google is trying to address, they don't have
their business is
SEO skills.
Yeah, they don't have like a background in engineering or marketing or anything like that, they have a website because it's a complement to whatever business they have.
Yes, and if Google suddenly says like, oh yeah, old content, we don't care about that, then suddenly that might become a headline in the newspaper somewhere. Oh, Google doesn't care about old content anymore. Maybe because something like the Internet Archive goes like, we'll take it, kind of thing. And suddenly you get like a journalist saying, oh, old content, Google says not important, the Internet Archive says, there's a whole new debate going on. The only thing people hear that are not SEO savvy is like, oh, we need to delete old content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's one of the things. Well, if it's helpful content, keep it, please. If it's not, then it's a different story. Maybe make it better, or indeed remove it.
Or remake it so it's better. But
yeah,
as someone who used to work at Google, do you get people asking you always like very similar questions about your experience at Google? What's the most popular thing that people ask you about Google?
Different things. There's not one thing that people ask. So I worked with great people at Google, really cool teams. One of the key things while working with the people was everyone's really there to try to improve the overall experience. Like, your work impacts millions. It's not a lot of people that can say that on a day-to-day basis. And everything you do from the morning that you come into the office till when you walk out at the end of the day has impacted millions. So that in itself is, once you realize that, it creates a certain feeling of responsibility as well, especially when you work in the search part.
You were saying that working at Google gave you like lots of like learnings and skills. Can you explain a little bit more on that?
One of the things that Google very much encourages is also self-education. So they have programs run by other Googlers in their, as volunteer. They're basically volunteering to share their knowledge. You can pretty much learn any language you want to learn in your time. There you can contribute. You're stimulated to make contributions to the team, be it in tools or workflow improvements, etc. While I was at Google, a couple of things I did. I made a number of internal tools that improved the workflow. Again, my librarian background with technical background really helped there to see what what the workflow could be improved there. And then one of the other things I did was also from a policy perspective. For example, well, at the beginning, when I joined Google, we had a number of different language teams, and within Google Search, search quality specifically, and we were all focusing on, it was basically new breaking ground kind of thing. We were all trying to figure out like, okay, where to go. Netcuts obviously on top, and we were basically all trying to figure out like how to do this best. And so different language teams came up with different ideas and different implementations in different markets. And well, as a stickler for uniformity as a librarian, I was like, no, let's unify this. So one of the things I did was I basically unified all the different policies into just one coherent policy that applied to all language markets on what to penalize, how to penalize it, which penalty to apply, all of that type of stuff. And basically wrote an internal policy document that allowed all the others in the team to take the same actions across languages and across markets, etc. And this then became for years the cornerstone of how to penalize websites. So yeah, this type of stuff. But I did it by myself. No one asked me to do that.
Yeah, I think I lost you a little bit there, but I got the main gist of what you were saying. With all the background that you have had, like at Google professionally in your career, where did you think search engines are going to be going in the next 5 to 10 years? How are they going to be evolving, especially with the the emergence of language models, popularly known as AIs?
Yeah, so that's also a good question. I have no idea. I am just like everyone else, a happy observer. I'm not working at the search engine right now, so I can't, like, I don't have impact there right now. I'm, like most SEO, reactive rather than proactive. Of course, we can suggest things to Google. I did that recently in an article on Search Engine Land, where I feel that with these language models, there is some valid concern that people are saying, like, okay, when you use these language models, you should also attribute the source. And I think that is a valid concern. We had this agreement with search engines that they crawl our websites and they give answers to users, but link back to us. So if the user wants to find more, they can find more on our website. And with generative AI, that is kind of, at the moment, not really there. And now Google said, like, oh, let's come up with a different protocol other than Robots.txt. I understand where they're coming from, because they don't want to stop crawling content. And I also think that just because we want content in the search engine doesn't mean that we want to then, well, actually the other way around. Just because we don't want content to be used for training language models doesn't mean that we don't want it in the search engine at the same time, you know? So those are two different things. So we need to separate those two. We can't say, let's use Robots.txt, which is one of the things I will be talking about, but we can't use Robots.txt as a tool to do everything. So to block entirely language model training and crawling and ranking in search engines. Those are two different things in my book. And I think it's an unfair proposition to put in front of publishers, take it or leave it. And I think Google can do better there. Now they want to come up with a more unique protocol, which then also has to be adopted by everyone. Whereas I'm thinking, why not use one of the mechanisms we already have? And we already can say to search engines, don't use this page for indexing with no index, or don't use this link for page rank calculation with no follow, or don't archive this, or, you know, this type of stuff. We have all of these different types of standards already present. The only thing we need to do is create just one more meta tag definition that says don't use this for training language model, or more specifically, use it but attribute. And there we can then start talking about, for example, Creative Commons or something similar. Like I use Creative Commons in my article as an example. It doesn't have to be that one, but it gives people an idea. What are the rights associated with this content? Can I use it to train AIs? We should also put the burden of if the companies that train like language models, they should carry the burden to check for the copyrights of the documents they're getting.
Yeah,
shouldn't be the other way around. We as webmasters should not have to hunt down every language model trying to figure out was our content used or not. It should be the other way around. They want to use our content, they should adhere to our copyrights. And copyright is something to keep in mind. And at the same time, though, I do hear what these companies and software companies are saying, including Google, as it is in the public domain. Because it's on the web, it's published, it is in the public domain. But that doesn't mean without attribution, without referencing.
It's like photography. That doesn't mean it's free to use. Like there are some rights associated to it. Just because an image from like a photojournalist is on Google, that doesn't mean you can get it and put it on your website.
But you're then required to link back to the photographer or to mention the photographer, and that's attribution. And that's one thing. Even if content is in the public domain, that doesn't take away the attribution potential. And I think the burden for checking that attribution, including reporting that attribution, is on the software companies that want to train these language models, not on the webmasters.
Yeah,
the webmasters should specify what the copyright the specific copyrights for the content that they have, and then the software company should adhere to that. And that was my proposal. Now, I use Creative Commons as
an example.
An example. It's not the only model. It's just to start the discussion, because I think Robots.txt, to block everything from being crawled in the first place, is also not a solution. Don't get me wrong, I like Robots.txt, and again, you can get a lot wrong with Robots.txt, which is one of the things I'm going to be talking about. And Robots.txt is most definitely one of those corner foundational pieces of your website, but you need to get that right, and you can significantly manage your crawl budget with it and solve a lot of other SEO issues with it. But at the same time, it can also hurt you a lot. It's a very powerful tool. And a lot of webmasters don't get that proper 100%. So, which is one of the reasons why I'm going to talk about that.
Yeah, and I wanted to go back to that. Like, what can people expect from your talk at Barbados SEO, which we know it's going to be about Robots.txt, but what can people expect without spoiling it too much? Because obviously we want people to come and see you speak live.
Yes. Well, you're going to get tips and tricks and better insights on when to use Robots.txt and when not, but also what are some of the dangers when using it. Also, what are the, you might be thinking, oh, I'm doing it right, but you're actually not. So some of the things to check. So I will talk about a number of different situations and fun examples. So
I was going to ask, I think this is going to be one of the last questions. Have you ever been to Barbados?
No, I have been to Bonaire, but not to Barbados.
Yeah. And how much are you looking forward to it? What do you expect from the conference?
I'm hoping to be able to talk to a lot of people, obviously, and to interact and to hear and answer questions and hear their concerns and questions. And I'm hoping for some good weather. And maybe, just maybe, there's a possibility to put a dive area somewhere in there.
And have like some nice weather in November, because Europe doesn't get the best weather in November. But
no, it doesn't. But it's okay. It's okay. I'm living in Central Europe, so it's pretty okay here.
Yeah. Well, I can't say the same for me. I live in the north of it. Well, thank you very much, Fili. It's been an absolute pleasure having you. And again, I look very much forward to seeing you speak at Barbados SEO. So thank you very much for having some time to chat with us.
Well, thank you very much, and I'll see you there.